Hi, everyone. Welcome to the latest PGCMLS Career Chat. I'm Elizabeth Ajunwa, and today I am joined with, I'm joined by one of my good friends, Stephanie Williams. She is a webcomic creator and a freelance writer, and she's here to talk a little bit about what she does today. That's what she does. And I just want to thank you so much for being with me today, Stephanie.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm honored, and I'm ready to talk everyone's ear off about the things that I do.
Right. So just to jump right into it, can you tell me a little bit about your career and what you do?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, I am a webcomic creator and also a freelance writer, but it was not always my job title. Back when I was in school, I actually thought I wanted to be a doctor, but it was a no because of surgeries, and I never thought of myself as like a queasy person, but unfortunately, I guess that I am. But
You just did it.
I just did it. So I actually got into the research side of things thanks to a couple of internships that I had with a few professors. And I'm like, mics are actually better. This is still gross, but I can handle this. So did that until I graduated. And then I got a job in an electron microscopy lab at a local hospital and had no idea what that was. But I needed the job. So I was like, I'll take it. And it was still related to, my degree. And unlike a lot of like my peers and stuff, they couldn't really get jobs that were aligned with their degrees. So I thought it was a blessing that I could. So I just said, what, I'll take it. I'll figure it out. So I'm glad that I did because it kind of got me back to my artistic side. So with electron microscopy, you take images of biopsies. It's this very long process, but long process short. When a biopsy is sent, we cut it up and we put it in this resin, and you cut it and then you put it on these small grids, and the doctors are able to see what the disease processes are. So something in the kidney, like something like lupus, they would be able to tell. So I found that fascinating, and the reason why I brought up the art side because of the photography is because you are telling a story of this piece of tissue, so the doctor can put two and two together and diagnose the patient properly. So
This is a lot of science.
it is a
Wow.
lot of science. I'm sorry if I lost anyone, but
No, not at all. It's really cool.
No, but it was like really good. Like the microscope is so it takes up almost the entire room, which is crazy for just a very small image. So it was pretty cool for this. I was feeling restless and I wasn't, fulfilled and happy or any of that. But writing was something that always kind of made me feel that way. So before I even got to freelance writing, I podcasted, which I never in a million years would have thought that I would podcast. Because one, I am shy, even if it doesn't seem that way. And like you're putting your thoughts out and you're putting them out into the world for people to receive, whether good or bad, and that's nerve-wracking. But I did it, and I actually did a solo podcast called The Lemonade Show, which basically covered like geeky stuff, nerdy news, comics, all of that. And then shortly after that, I did a joint podcast with someone else where we covered like Black women in comics to history. So like Storm, Misty Knight, Monica Rambeau, Vixen, Amanda Waller. So all of these women characters in comics, because a lot of times people don't know, like unless it's Storm, some folks really just don't know. And that got me back to the research, the research that I love so much. We got to research these issues. So once that podcast ended, started writing for Sci-Fi Fangirls and basically just doing deep dives on comics. Because again, if I can just live and do research all day. And what a great excuse to be able to do it with reading comics and watching movies and TV shows. So I do something like the history of the X-Men and just kind of to relate it to everyday things, like how Xavier is a terrible boss. Because he is, and like relating that.
Hot take.
It is a hot take, but he's a terrible boss. Just kind of the way he mismanages the X-Men. And
yeah, like he puts them all in danger. And
danger.
Yeah, I never thought about this before.
I don't even know if they get PTO.
Yeah, how does that work?
What's the healthcare situation? Because, Storm's dealing with the trauma of being claustrophobic. Wolverine's got his thing going on. Scott has daddy issues. So the most strongest mind in the universe can't seem to get his students the proper mental health care that they need. So, it's comics and you're probably not thinking it that way, but I like to kind of talk about things like that and relate it so that people can look at these characters differently and just kind of get into comics, because I really love that story form. So in saying that, I said, why am I not making comics myself? So as I got more comfortable with writing, and because I do nothing but live, breathe, and eat comics, I finally decided to go out on my own and create my own. Two of them, one is Parenthood Activate, which is my way of just kind of telling the story of my everyday life, raising my, he's now 4-year-old, and how that goes. And it's been really cathartic for me, because sometimes I want to scream and I'm just like, wow, we really chose to bring another human into the world, and I love it. But there are times when it's trying, and this comic has been a really great way to just kind of work through that and share the funny moments and the frustrating moments with everyone in my favorite way of telling stories, via comics. And then for my other comic, which is called But What If Though, it's a play on the Marvel What If series, which they take characters and all these wild things happen with characters that you never thought would, or actually are kind of predictable, but the idea is that that's what's going on. But for me, it's more of a variety hour, because I have different artists come in and do the artwork and tell these crazy stories. Like, I don't like Wonder Woman and her sister Nubia and how they came to be. And I had Rihanna actually bring them to life because the Fenty store was in Themyscira. So just, off the cuff kind of things.
Which would make sense. Like, it would make sense, an island full of women.
Yes.
Fenty beauty, right?
It would make sense. It's Rihanna, so why not? So those are, my two comics. And when I think about it, I don't know how my trajectory got to where it is, but when I do think back on it, like, there's bits and pieces. Like I say, I still use the research skills that I learned in college and through my career as electron microscopist, while researching comics and everything else to do what I do. And I'm actually kind of, I guess, settling into this idea that, wow, I'm really doing this freelance thing when I'm so used to having a 9-to-5. Like, that's a heck of a transition.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, you've kind of already touched on it, but my next question for you was going to be, what projects and things are you currently working on? You talked about Parenthood Activate, and But What If Though? What are some other things that you're involved with or currently working on?
So right now I'm working on finishing up the stories for a Kickstarter that I launched it. Well, not launched it. Sound like my 4-year-old, that I launched back in February for a story that was kind of, that I guess came out of But What If Though. It was just a little short I did, like, hey, what if Misty Knight, Storm, Monica Rambeau, and She-Hulk were all roommates? And it was kind of set to Living Single, because Living Single's streaming now, so I've been watching a lot of it. And I thought it would be a great opportunity to just kind of play with these characters that I have no idea if I'll ever be able to officially write for. And again, show these aspects of these superheroes, this very human aspect of these superheroes, to just make them more relatable and just kind of do some things with them that hasn't been done before. So I'm working on that. The Kickstarter was fully funded, which was like within almost 24 hours, which was bonkers to me, because it's really niche when you think about it. Because one, Black women superheroes, and then Living Single, and the 90s aesthetic is just very niche. But I guess the folks wanted it because it was like it was funded way quicker than I thought it would be. But I'm so happy that it was. So finishing that up, and I'm trying to figure out what I'm gonna do next. Really, Parenthood Activate still going, so working on scripts for that. Same thing with But What If Though. So just chugging along with these stories.
Yeah, I mean, that's so awesome, because I've heard of people who have projects on Kickstarter, and it takes them months to even get half funded. And so to have something, an idea that resonated with people so much that it was fully funded with less, I think it was less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I thought that was really cool. And I think this is a good question to follow up with your your Kickstarter and how successful it was.
Mhm.
You actually have quite of a following on Twitter and social media. Um, and I think you can tell me if I'm wrong, but I think that might have played a little bit of a role
Oh,
in you
for sure.
being able to fully fund your Kickstarter. Can you tell me a little bit about how that came about and what you do to maintain your
Yeah, so I got back on Kickstarter because, not Kickstarter, Twitter. Kickstarter's
audience?
on my mind, but Twitter because, I was looking for a community as far as writing was concerned because Facebook I wasn't really finding. I know there's like a ton of groups and stuff, but I like wasn't finding what I was particularly looking for. Instagram, just photos and whatnot. So it's kind of hard to kind of connect folks. Well, for me to connect with folks on there. So I decided to try Twitter for the 11th time because I had tried it before and like Twitter is one of those things you either get it or you don't. And I finally got it. So I was on there and just kind of started getting into conversation with people because like either from live tweeting shows or like if a hashtag was going or something like that, it was kind of like in the mix and in the conversation. So quite naturally, because I don't know how any other way to be, like I was just myself. Because a lot of times when you think of Twitter and stuff, you think of these Twitter personalities and people just kind of being whatever this person is that they projected onto, their Twitter account. I didn't get the playbook on that, so I was just being literally who I am, and because of that, like my love for comics and these sci-fi movies and horror movies and things like that, and anime just started to kind of present themselves because what else am I going to talk about? Like those are the things I like. That's what I'm going to talk about. So there's a community for that. And I just kind of started interacting with these folks and just doing my thing. I would post like panels and stuff from comics that I was reading, or again, I would do my live tweet of that. So like as I was reading a comic, I would kind of like live tweet that out, and that caught some folks' attention. And of course, with the podcast, that helped. And the next thing I knew, I looked up and I had 18,000 followers. Some 4 years later. Which is nothing to really sneeze at because those are all organic follows. And I know that they're organic follows because Twitter accounted for about 50% of the Kickstarter funding, which again is really wild to think about because a lot of times you'll have a ton of followers, but not really the support. So that just told me that, the followers that are there, I'm so happy that I cultivated, those relationships and built my Twitter account the way that I did, which is just me. So it meant a lot that folks were so receptive of, of me and the things that I like to talk about, and so much so that they wanted to help fund the project.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. Going on from there, I mean, talking about Twitter and social media and Kickstarter and web comics, those are all non-traditional jobs. And you went from, what was your major in again? It was
So my major was biological science, and then my job after that, so after I finished school, was electron microscopy, and it's like night and day because one
yeah.
is just a regular lab job. Again, a regular 9 to 5. So regular 9 to 5 paycheck and not having to send any invoices or anything like that. So making that transition and this transition was slowly happening. Like I never want to lead people astray and say like, one day I woke up and I said, I want to do this. It was never that. It was always like happening little by little. So from the podcasting, to the freelance writing, to finally putting out my own comic, and then actually getting let go by a job is actually what finally pushed me out, because I left the hospital to try to find something else that would, I guess, give me a little bit more time, one, so I could work from home, and then two, a little bit more flexibility so I can do this extra stuff and not be so burnt out. But that was a lie. Still burnt out because I'm still putting in a full 8 hours a day to this job and then trying to be creative afterwards. So when I was finally left that job, I was like, you know what, let me just see, because by that time I was making enough on the freelance side that I could feel comfortable enough to kind of be like, okay. And even when I say comfortable enough, that is also a lie. Like, just at that point I was just like, let's just see what happens in this time, and then if nothing comes of it, then hit the pavement and try to look for another job. But let's see what happens when I was able to put in like 110% into what I wanted to do, and I wasn't giving 80% of my brain power to trying to survive the 9 to 5.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it sounds like with a career like this, you have to take a risk, and there's not always going to be kind of like a blueprint for what you should do. And so I think I wanted to have this conversation with you because it is like, there are many different types of careers, many different ways to come about a career. And you can do the traditional route of biology in a lab job or librarian and research, but there are other avenues. And in today's day and age, it's maybe even something you may not have even thought.
Yeah.
Like, because it kind of, with you, I feel like you kind of created this career.
It honestly feels that way, because again, like, there was nothing that I was ever really actually seeking out. It's just that the things that I was doing, like, eventually just led to this next thing and led to the other thing. And then the next thing I know, I looked up and it was something I was doing full time. So I guess when I think of that, when I told folks like how I got where I did, I'm just like, I'm sorry, I do not have a blueprint for you. All I can tell you is that if you put in the work, and I know that kind of sounds like cliche or whatever, but it's true. If you put in the work, or at least move in the direction it is that you are trying to head, there is no time cap on it. You will hopefully eventually get there. I don't want to sell you any empty promises, but I am a believer that, eventually you will arrive where you want to. And even where I am now, I'm just kind of like, where is this leading?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just kind of like anxiously but excited and kind of like along for the ride, which is like, but aren't you driving? I'm like, I am driving sometimes, but other times I'm like on autopilot trying to get to my next destination.
Well, I'm glad you're sharing like the reality of how you got to where you are now. And with that, what are some challenges you face trying to break into the comics writing industry? Because it's not an easy realm to get into at all. Like, it's not like you can wake up one day and be like, oh, I'm going to work for Marvel. Like, like it's hard.
It's not at all. So for that, again, because of like the people that I encounter, either online or like going to comic conventions, kind of building these relationships, it was with a lot of folks that were already there. And me getting out of my own way and not being afraid to ask folks like, hey, how did you do this? That's what helped me, is reaching out to these folks that I admire or I built these relationships with and asking for, a piece of their time to say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this webcomic. Should I create the website first? Do I need to be worried about that? Is there somewhere else I can post the web pages, the comic pages when they're done for free? Like, what does that look like? When I'm contracting artists, like, what does an art contract look like? What's a fair price to pay someone, and just all of these things, or how to negotiate. So asking folks who are already there, because like you can only Google so much, and I know Google is supposed to be your friend, but sometimes Google is really, really broad. And if you don't really know the correct questions to ask, it's not going to be very helpful. So I want to say that I was fortunate enough to have like support, and to know folks to say, hey, how can you help me? And also, let me bring this up as well, because folks don't ever bring this up, but I have the support of my partner, my husband, and that also gave me some of the freedom to be able to really engage with what I do. Because I have a 4-year-old. We have a 4-year-old. maybe I would be able to get it done, but I wouldn't be able to get it done the way that I am with if I didn't have him to help, and also be there for that support. So that's also real, because a lot of folks, you'll see these influencers and whatnot, and they'll make it seem like it's just like this easy thing, and just like, no, like, you have bills to pay, and you probably have somebody that might be helping you with that. And there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's just being upfront and real, so you don't give people like these false dreams and everything.
Right. I think it's very important to say that, however, someone in, I guess we can call what you do related to social media and entertainment and comics, you need a support system still. And like, even if there's not like a clear blueprint, there is like someone who is being supportive of that person. And then also, like you said, there's this consistency that you have to come with and be ready for. Like, I mean, I know that you don't have, when you say you don't have a traditional 9 to 5, it's not that you're not working. Like, you're working non-traditional hours. So you could be working on writing something for hours, up late working on editing a podcast late at night. That means you're working. That's work.
Hey, when we did the Girlfriends podcast,
like,
just, I mean,
no
it's
one
like
knows about.
Which people should know about. We also need to bring back, but we'll talk about that later. But that was work, and it's work. Just watching, taking notes, and you're watching stuff for entertainment. But when you start to do it in a way where you're trying to like get information out of it, it kind of changes how you look at things and the way that you use your time. So, no, you're right.
Yeah. So, do you feel like you've had any other challenges, or you feel like you've had a good amount of support?
So I've had a ton of support. My challenges have really mainly come from me. And by that, I say that, a lot of people think, or like myself, I thought I was a great multitasker. I'm not. I'm not. And that's just being real. Like, I can be, but it just depends on what those tasks are. And I'm somebody who can be a self-starter. I mean, evidently I am to some degree, but sometimes I procrastinate. And I don't have I don't have a boss telling me like, hey, get this done, or like some job quota to meet. So I have to like kind of put that on myself, like by, deadlines and respecting those deadlines, and also giving myself time off. Because when if you're working from home, it's kind of hard to kind of distinguish what's time off and what's not, because you're already, in your home. So you think,
which I think right now, and people can relate.
Yes. And it's hard because you don't really think of needing time off because you're at home, but you still need that. Even with working something that's not a traditional 9 to 5, and if you enjoy it, you still need time off to just kind of not do anything, or at least recharge and, get yourself ready for the next thing that you have to do. Because if you don't, you're going to burn out. And I definitely faced a little bit of burnout because like when I initially left my other job, I'm like, oh crap, like I gotta have, like, let me line these pitches up. Let me make sure that, I'm getting X amount of articles out so that I can have, this and that. And then it did not end very well. But I learned that, I learned that pretty quickly, and I'm happy that I did, because I would hate to be learning it now. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, burnout is real. I think everyone's going to relate to that. And it's a good message to remind everyone to like make sure to take care of your mental health, especially during this time.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my questions for you. I'm like, what's the next question? So, this might be more of a personal question, but what is it like being in the nerd comic writing industry as a Black woman or woman of color? Like, what's that like?
It is interesting. It is frustrating. It's very similar to how it is to be a Black woman in any space, just because a million things. One, because it's a white male dominated field. Same thing with podcasting. So again, like kind of was getting my training with that too, but it's I don't want to say this, like it's been frustrating in ways where I'm just kind of like second guessing myself a lot. So like, is this even good? You know, is this worth putting out? And then I look at some mediocre stuff from some other folks. And I'm like, well, no, like and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with it being mediocre or anything like that. But the point is that there's this extra pressure to put out my best every single time. And again, that's just the attitude that I've carried for a long time. Because, you know, you as a Black woman, like, you know, like you feel like you always have to bring your A game, because if you don't and someone catches you sleeping, then all of a sudden it's a problem. So I kind of treat it the same way. And again, I think because I was able to make those connections and get that support, I haven't felt it in the same way as some of other Black women that I've talked to or been in the industry for a very long time. So in a way, I've kind of been shielded from that just a touch, but I feel like my time, you know, I say that, but there's always a chance that that could happen.
No, no, it won't. But I mean, yeah, I mean, I think that's real, like that. It's imposter syndrome, feeling like you don't really belong, and especially in spaces that are male dominated or dominated by someone who's considered to be in the dominant group in this country or the United States. You can feel like people are always questioning your knowledge on nerd stuff all the time.
All the time. Actually, my Twitter Abby is Vision from, I don't know if you guys have seen like the Marvel movies. It's Vision in a yellow do-rag. And I'm like, you know, it doesn't get any more comic-y than that.
Yeah.
That's my Abby. I changed it because I will say that there's a difference, that if there's a Black woman in the Abby on Twitter or something else in the Abby on Twitter, like the different reactions that you'll get. When I initially changed it, like I didn't get challenged as much on like my comic knowledge. But then when folks kind of like, you know, got an idea more who I was, then all of a sudden it was back.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that that happened. But when you brought up the imposter syndrome, I feel that all the time heavily with the Kickstarter, because I had just put out my first webcomic in maybe, I don't know, like 4 or 5 months prior to that. And to have that level of success, I'm just kind of really fresh and new to writing the comics. Like that made me feel like I didn't earn it, which is sounds very crazy for me to say, but that's just real and how I felt at the time. Because I'm like, have I paid enough dues? But I'm just like, girl, you're tripping, because if this was anyone else, specifically, you know, those white guys, they'd be like, whatever.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go ahead and make what I'm gonna make.
Think of there's a book, Notes on a Young Black Chef. It's about his name is Kwame Nwachi. He's a chef actually in the DC area here, and he talks about his life and how when he was creating a gourmet restaurant, he had didn't win Top Chef, but got really high up on Top Chef, and later on he opens a gourmet restaurant, and he had these feelings of like, oh my gosh, are people going to think, you know, I don't deserve this. Ultimately ended up opening, after some failure, opened now really great restaurant. But it just, I think no matter how much success you've had, experience you've had, I think many of us, like if not everybody, feel some sort of imposter syndrome. So I think, again, when we're talking about careers and what we're going to do in our lives, I think it's important to talk about the things that might challenge us and that we work through and succeed past. So thank you for sharing that.
No problem. Because you're always going to feel it, but it'll go away.
Yeah.
It'll come back.
Because like when you did succeed at the Kickstarter and you realized like you had the money for it, you're like, I got this. Yeah. So what is your favorite part of your career right now?
Ooh, that is a good question. The creating part. which sounds like really broad or whatever, but no, like I really enjoy that process. And like because of the pandemic that's going on right now, like I've gotten to see like a different side of myself in that kind of process because one, we're in the middle of a pandemic and like trying to like function just every day and just get used to what this new normal is. And by saying that, I've been able to like kind of see my process of creating kind of stretched out because I'll do things like I'll be watching something or reading something. I'll have an idea because for me, my best work comes from just randomly. Just I'm watching something and it's Allen Iverson stepping over Tyronn Lue in that NBA Finals from like the early 2000s or whatever. I'm sorry if I lost.
Sports, I have no idea what you're saying. I just want you to know. I don't know.
But hopefully,
That thing.
Yeah, if you
But I'm absolutely gonna look it up after.
So that, and then there is a panel from an X-Men book from the 80s. It's my favorite Storm story where she fights this Morlock named Callisto. And in it, Storm doesn't use her power. She just uses, her hands and her feet. And she beats Callisto. And Callisto falls because like Storm like throws a knife and hits her in the chest, but it doesn't, she misses her heart on purpose, so she doesn't kill her. And Storm steps over her in the same way that Allen Iverson stepped over Tyronn Lue.
Okay.
In that, I got the idea and I was just like, hey, what if I do something like the X-Men, reimagine this whole thing with Callisto. It's a one-on-one match between Storm and Callisto. They're playing basketball and, Storm hits a fadeaway, Callisto falls, and then Storm steps over her. So, and that's for But What If, though, that webcomic, but that was a process for me to get to that point.
Yeah.
So one day, because I was watching The Last Dance, I was looking at, so like they were showing like Jordan's one of his famous shot against the Cavaliers when they were first in trying to like get past them in the NBA final, not NBA finals, but the playoffs. So then I went down this rabbit hole looking at like clutch shots or whatever. And then I actually watched that game when Allen Iverson did that and made me, so that photo popped up and I was like, oh, okay. A few days later, I was doing some research for another thing, came across that iconic Storm panel, and it was just kind of how my brain works. I was like, oh wait, the cinematic parallels, like it's the same thing. And then like from there, just thinking about it, letting it marinate, I was like, oh wait, I can definitely write a thing where they're doing this basketball game. And that was like a week process. So that's why I say I just really enjoy the creative process because it goes from literally nothing to this thing, and then give it to the artist and you get back, the sketches and just kind of see it come to life has just been the most fulfilling thing. The fact that, this idea came, I was able to give it to someone, explain it well enough so that they could actually illustrate it, and to get that back, like that's just been, I don't know, kind of like research again, running experiments, not being able to necessarily see what's being put on the paper. I used to have to do Western blots. And
what is that?
So Western blots, we usually use it to like look, or Southern blots, I should say, to look for proteins and like how they fall. When you're looking for a particular protein in DNA or whatever, and or cells or whatever, and it's very frustrating because you have to be perfect. Yeah. You're not perfect, then it doesn't turn out the way that it's supposed to. And when it finally does come together, because it goes from going down to where the mice are, getting a piece of their DNA, so a tail clip, taking that DNA, spinning it all down, getting and extracting it, and then, mixing it with some other stuff, and then getting your little pipette and like doing this, these Southern blots or whatever. And that's a long process, like a 2-day experiment. So to finally get it right and it comes out perfectly, it feels amazing, but it feels terrible when you wasted all that time and it doesn't come out right. So I'm always thinking of that. So I'm just kind of like, when I go through the process, I'm that taught me how to enjoy and like be in it, be in those moments, because when I get to the end result, like, what is that going to feel like? Is it going to feel good, or is it going to feel terrible because I didn't, because I didn't really pay attention to this or that. So again, see, you could you can start in one thing and then
and it can relate. Like,
yeah. All things are connected. It sounds very like Jill Scottish and like Erykah Badu, but
yeah, maybe more Erykah than Jill, but
yeah, more Erykah than Jill. This is great.
So, and you can talk briefly about this because you did kind of mention it already that you work with other writers and illustrators. Like, what has that process been like? Because, like, in that instance, you kind of have to tell people what to do, right?
It's been amazing, and not because of the telling folks what to do, but because I mainly work with other Black women. This has been very important to me because as I've, from just my comic research and just like who's been involved in what projects and stuff, like Black women illustrators don't really get, or they are now, but like still like the shine that they deserve. Is extremely talented. I've also really had a fun time working with non-binary people. So working with other folks who, either look like me or don't, has been amazing because I don't have to spell it out for them. Because, we all have similar experiences, or the Black collective or whatever, and not having to spell it out the way that I would have for a white creator, or them knowing what to put in without me even saying it. So my artist for Parenthood Activate, Sarah Macklin, there was a script that I had where it was like the last snack, because snacks go real quick in my house. And like I almost kind of have to hide them. And often like my husband and son will find whatever that last thing is and eat it. So the comic was inspired by that. So it kind of had like this 007 type of vibe to it. It was the two of them, kind of scouting and figuring out like how they're going to take this ice cream sandwich that's underneath this, this casing or whatever. And asked her to put a bonnet on me, but she did, and it worked. It looked really great, and I didn't have to tell her that. So I love working, with other Black women and, folks that just kind of know to kind of do those little things, and being able to give the artist enough freedom to see their magic, because they're telling the story just as much as you are. I'm someone who believes that a writer is nothing without the artist. That's just because I can't draw. I could just tell say words or whatever, but you have the keys to really bring the story to life. So it's been so fulfilling. It really honestly has. And I've had the honor and the joy to work with some really, really talented and great artists.
Awesome. Maybe this is an unfair question, but who is maybe the coolest or most interesting person you've gotten to meet or work with due to your career?
I got to interview Simone Missick.
Oh yeah,
she played Luke Cage season 2, Misty Knight, which is really surreal. I love Simone Missick. I have a crush on her, and just kind of get a chance to talk to her. But she's just so down to earth and so about her craft, and it was just really kind of inspiring to me, because I'm like, wow, look at you sounding like regular degular, and it's no problem.
Yeah,
and it was just really fun. So I want to say that was kind of like, it was a really great experience. Yeah. And again, like, what?
Yeah. I mean, because I think at the time you were doing the podcast, The Misty Nights.
No, it had just ended.
Okay. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, but she's Misty Knight, and you were doing a podcast.
And she knew about the podcast on top of that. So yeah. It really blew my mind. I was like, what?
Right. But she's on like a hit Netflix show. So.
Yeah. I'm like, okay.
Yeah.
Imposter Syndrome popped up then too.
Yeah, but I mean, but I think with what we've talked about this whole time, you building up your following, you making those connections, you're working. I mean, like you said, it's 4 years of time to get to now. It's not just out of nowhere. So, I mean, I think the last question I have for you is, would you recommend this career path to others?
Yes, I like, of course, because if I told you no, then be like, why are you doing it then? But no,
Yeah.
like I do. Just know going in that however you get to it will not be the same as the way that I did. But I feel like everyone has a creative inside of them. Be it writing, be it drawing, be it, just come at baking, every kitchen, whatever. Like everybody has that in them. So you're able to just kind of bring that out. And if you're doing it as a hobby, that's okay. Hobbies can turn to a way to support yourself. But, if you can think it, then you can do it. And I know that, again, like it's cliche, it doesn't really work like that because there are just different things in life that prevent us from getting from point A to point B so quickly. But it's true though. Like if you can think of it, then, there's a way to figure out how to get to it. It just might take time. It's not overnight. It's just not an overnight thing. And it's even sometimes for me, I look at stuff and I see things that folks are doing and I have to still remind myself like, hey, that didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen overnight. But just having to remind myself of that is always kind of funny to me. Because I'm like, you're literally doing this. You know that it's not, but it's really easy to kind of feel that way. So do it. Do the thing that you want to do. If it means doing it after you get off work, then so be it. But there's a way for you to figure out what it is that you really in your heart want to do, and then it might change because we're all growing and changing. And the things that we like to do, sometimes it changes. But there's always like a I guess something that is always related. So even though I'm not doing what I was doing when I got out of school, it's still related to where my heart is, and that's researching things and, kind of teaching people like what this is and bringing them information in a way that they can receive it.
Sounds like a librarian.
Okay, so you know what? Hey,
no,
like 5 years from now,
you'll do that next.
Yes.
Stephanie, I want to thank you so much for joining me today. I think this was like a really great conversation.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me.
We recently had the comics chat conversation, so I would suggest anybody watching this to go back and see if they can see the recording of that, because it elaborates more on comics and the really great things that are out there. If you want to, Stephanie, can you tell people where they can connect with you, like what your social media handle is?
I sure can.
Yeah.
So on Instagram and also Twitter, I'm at Steph_I_Will. My middle name does not start with an I. Don't know why I did it, but I did. You can follow both my webcomics on Webtoon. So But What If Though and Parenthood Activate, exactly how I said it. Same thing for Instagram. They have their IG pages. So that would be BWIT for But What If Though, and then Parenthood Activate. And I'm finally putting together a website for myself because I've needed one for a long time. That is not up yet. But if you go to my Twitter or even to the Parenthood Activate website, like I'll have that information up once it's ready, because I've been getting yelled at. And folks are right. Like I do need to do that because I actually have work to show and to link people to.
Yeah, well, we'll try to provide the links to all of your stuff so you can see the work that she's put out there. And have fun following her on Twitter because she's very funny. And like Chris, some like one of the Captain America people retweet you, or somebody somebody retweeted you?
Oh, I think I don't even know. I know most recently, I think it was Orlando Jones.
Yeah. Okay.
Which I thought was pretty cool, and I'm sorry, y'all, not to sound like that person who's like, oh, I'm mighty, I'm on Twitter, but like I've had some interactions on there with some folks that, we either admire, we look at, and just like, wait, what?
Yeah, like how?
I'm able to kind of like keep up with it, but that's the one for the most recently that I can think of. And also, actually, Erica Alexander, who played Maxine
on Living Single.
Yeah, and she saw like the whole Living Heroes thing and thought it was really cool and told me
that's really cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and funny enough, that happened 2 weeks before no, 3 weeks before the Kickstarter launch. And that's actually the push that said, you know what, go ahead, let's see what happens. Because people have been asking, but you know, when she saw that, I was like, all right, I'm doing this.
Yeah, I can do it. Well, like I said, thank you again for joining me. And thanks everyone who has watched this career chat today. Hopefully it's inspired you to maybe jump into a non-traditional career path. And if nothing else, check out comics and enjoy those because I love them, and clearly Stephanie loves them because she makes them. So, and we always have resources that you can use that help you find comics. So we do have a resource called Comics Plus that links you to some of the latest comics, and you can access that free with your library card. And if you have any questions on how to access that, you can communicate with us and we can give you more information. But thank you again, Stephanie. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And
thank you.
Yeah. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. Elizabeth, thank you for having Stephanie and leading such an awesome talk. And Stephanie, thank you so much for sharing your experience and your awesome art with us. So if you are watching on Crowdcast or Facebook, I definitely recommend you check out those links and read some of Stephanie's comics now. And if you enjoyed this and want to learn more about different careers and other programs we have at PGC MLS virtually, you can visit us online at pgcmls.info and click virtual events to learn more. Thank you again so much for joining us, and we hope you have a beautiful day.